Greetings. This is Professor Welch, continuing our discussion of important terms and definitions in the area of emergency management. Stakeholders, S-T-A-K-E, holders, those are people who have or think they have a personal interest in the outcome. Alternative hazard adjustments. This identifies ways to reduce losses and speed recovery. Risk assessment and risk of loss. Risk is the possibility of loss or injury. One estimates the impact that a hazard would have on people, services, structures of the community. A hazard is a source of danger that may or may not lead to an emergency or disaster, such as lightning striking. Stafford, S-T-A-F-F-O-R-D Act. This created a system in place whereby presidential disaster declarations trigger financial and physical assistance through FEMA. You may remember listening to the news on various occasions and hearing that a disaster had been declared, and that meant that federal money was available. The president is the one that declares it a disaster. FEMA, F-E-M-A, they are the coordinator of the National Response Plan. They support requests from local, state, and the federal government. Response, R-E-S-P-O-N-S-E. That is the goal to protect population and limit and minimize damages and secondary impacts. Secondary impacts would be a disaster caused by a disaster, such as hazard materials being released after an earthquake. The earthquake was the original disaster, and that may have caused some chemical to be released elsewhere. CERT, S-C-R-T, Community Emergency Response Teams. These are composed of homeowners organized to perform emergency tasks in the neighborhood. Homeland Security Act. This was signed in 2002, and this restructured emergency management by integrating various agencies. HAZUS-MH. This is a computer program that predicts losses from earthquakes, floods, and so forth. This program estimates casualties, damages, and economic loss. Civil society. This is a society including all groups independent of the government. Eminent domain, E-M-I-N-E-N-T. This is the taking of private property by the government. The Constitution requires that it can be taken, but there's a requirement of just compensation, and this is part of the Constitution. NIMS is the National Incident Management System. Functional annexes. These should describe how the emergency organization will perform or function. That was functional annexes. Policy entrepreneur. They act as advocates or champions of an issue. These are stakeholders. The recovery phase. Recovery is restoring to normal. There are 4 major types of flood control works. These are channelization, dams, levees, L-E-V-E-E-S, which we have in Sacramento. You may have heard about Sacramento. And a flood wall. Now, wildfires, these can be the result of burn areas with nothing but natural vegetation. That's called a wild land fire. But an interface, I-N-T-E-R-F-A-C-E, that would be a fire with both natural vegetation and building structure, such as a big fire in Hollywood Hills. Hazmat, H-A-Z-M-A-T, that's hazard materials posing unreasonable risk to health, safety, and property. And I understand that truck drivers who deliver hazmat materials or transport them have to have special qualifications. Technological standards or technological hazards are three types: boiling point, flash point, and ignition. Next, we look at some terms of LEMA and what they should prepare. They should prepare a budget, and the budget should contain a contingency fund that addresses the costs and resources needed in the event of an emergency. Wet flooding, WETFLOOD proofing, allows water to empty portions of the structure during flooding. Relocation involves moving the structure to higher ground out of the flood. Remember, NIMS was created in response to 9/11. Hazard, just to review that, is referring to potential for extreme events to affect people, property, and the natural environment. Emergency managers, their role is to prevent or reduce losses due to hazards and disasters and emergencies. They can go to school and they may obtain a certificate. They apply, have certain training, and then pass tests in certain areas to get a certificate. They are professionals. Emergency workers can be professionals or they can be volunteers. Should a manager be involved in research? Yes, he is a professional. And nowadays we see so many things available on the web to help emergency managers, and research is continuing so fast that emergency managers, they must keep abreast of what is new. Issue champion is one who has expertise to promote emergency planning. They are stakeholders who advocate for their issues. Two areas commonly arise of legal concern. One is the claim that a government responding to emergency did damage to person or property. Second claim is that the government failed to respond to a disaster, and such failure caused damage to person or properties. There are exceptions to liability. There can be no liability for a quarantine. Federal workers who use due care are not liable. And then there are certain discretionary functions that the government does that gives them immunity. The old saying, I remember in law school, the king can do no wrong. So the federal government, the liability is only in certain areas. Explain technical guidance for hazard analysis. Emergency planning is needed for extremely hazardous substances. Define adverse selection. That would be hazard insurance suffers from the fact that many homeowners, they don't want to pay the high expense of earthquake insurance, and so they don't. The population does not do that. Channelization is the process of deepening and strengthening a stream of a channel, and that's important. Remember, learning criteria is a standard for judging the success of a training program or written test or performance test or skills, and this would be during a training program. LARED, L-A-R-E-D, This is a network of Latin American social scientists that publish scholarly works on disasters in the region and highlight special human vulnerabilities. Those are important. Pan American Health Organization. This is part of the WHO, World Health Organization. It emphasizes retrofitting hospitals and structures public health program. Adverse selection is the tendency for hazard insurance to be purchased mainly by those at the greatest risk of filing a claim. Access monitoring. You must continually monitor the hazard and project its future status. There are important types of flooding. There's RIVERINE, which is mainstream water overflow. There's flash. There's alluvion, fan, and this is a foot steep in the valley walls. And there's ice, debris. There's surface ponding. There's fluctuating lake levels. And control structures such as a dam or a levee, and this is well known in Sacramento area. This will be the end of the dictation on this tape of important definitions that you should review and re-review.